hopeful. And this is evident in the stories you might read or hear, or the reports that came out of Gaza, talking about people being hopeful for the future. Maybe you've seen recently some graduation ceremonies for students, and some of them are orphans who have lost parents during the war. So it's in one way or another, people are fighting for survival, and at the same time, they are hopeful for a better future, for a better tomorrow.
What was the past 24 hours like for you and your family? Did you go to stock up on food? Have you got enough food in your house should aid be suspended again?
Just to put this in a context, your report before having me describe the situation as fragile. And honestly, Rob, since the ceasefire, like 10 days ago, since the ceasefire kicked in, and we have this feeling that it is fragile. When you have more than 97, up to last night, I was reading the news, more than 97 people have been killed since the ceasefire. What type of ceasefire is this? It is fragile. And what type of peace politicians are talking about? When you have more than 97 people being killed and more than 290 people are injured. Most of them, if not all of them, are civilians, including women and children. Last 24 hours were extremely stressful. I have two of my sisters who were displaced in our apartment, in my apartment. And then when the escalation happened yesterday, before that, they had gone back to their homes in eastern Gaza. But when that escalation happened yesterday, they came back to our apartment, to our house, which means they fled the area, which means they were trying to find some kind of safer areas within the Gaza city. When it comes to shopping, I've seen it. Yesterday, some people were shopping. Really, there was a panic. They could shop. There was a kind of shopping panic among people, feeling that, the crossings might be closed and we might be back to the starvation or famine period as in August this year. And that feeling of instability and the feeling that it is fragile, this fragility was obvious indeed yesterday. But just to put it in a better context, Rob, honestly, when it comes to humanitarian aid, the flow was not perfect. It was really minimal, and people have been buying things instead of receiving aid from humanitarian agencies. And you can imagine, we've been into this for more than 2 years now, and people have lost sources of income, and they are asked to buy things from the market for really high prices. And how can they manage?
So the prices haven't fallen yet, have they?
There is a significant drop in some food items. The prices of food items, but still, you are aware. Youth unemployment, poverty, these are the highest in Gaza. These are the highest rates globally, and of course, what makes things harder is the destruction and the war consequences.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us again. Really appreciate it. Ahmed Kamal Junina, who's head of the English department at Al-Aqsa University. He mentioned those airstrikes that have taken place since the ceasefire came into effect, and said that most of the people who were killed were civilians. Israel, of course, says it only targets Hamas militants.
So 43 members of his family were killed.
China's top leaders are gathering in Beijing this week to decide on the country's key goals and aspirations for the rest of the decade. The latest 5-year plan will be the blueprint. The world's second largest economy will follow between 2026 and 2030. Let's cross to our business presenter, Nick Marsh, who joins us from our desk in Singapore. Nick, we'll talk about the 5-year plan in just a second, but in the meantime, there's been some new economic data coming out of China.
Yeah, that's right, Catherine. We've had the latest GDP figures coming out of China, sort of basically a measure of how much China's economy is growing. It shows that the economy has actually slowed to its weakest pace of growth in a year. It's 4.8% 8%. So the economy is still growing, but it's growing at a slower rate than it has been for quite some time. And there's a couple of ways you can look at it. You could say, firstly, well, yeah, the economy is slowing. You've got these domestic problems. You've got a trade war with Washington, of course. You know, China's in a tough spot. The other way to look at it is to say, well, it's 4.8%, as people expected. China's still very likely to hit the 5% growth target that it had set for this year. And 5%, I mean, Western countries would bite off your hand for that kind of growth year on year. So you could also just read it as another sign of the robustness of the Chinese economy in the face of all these big threats and challenges internally and externally, you know, that we talk about so much. The tariffs, the threats, the tension with Washington. You know, it's tempting to be swept along in the drama, but in actual fact, Chinese exports, they're doing pretty fine. Doesn't mean there's not uncertainty, doesn't mean, you know, you're going to trivialize these problems, but a lot of the time the two sides come back from the brink, and these figures show that China so far in this context isn't really doing too badly economically.
And this data tells us about a period where we've seen rising trade tensions between China and the US. Is that reflected in the data?
Well, funnily enough, not really. Actually, that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that Washington's threats of tariffs and the trade war and the export controls that we've seen on, you know, rare earths or, you know, American chips to China, that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that doesn't cause significant problems, you know, in the long term. And countries basically caught in the middle don't really know what to do because there's so much uncertainty economically. And China's leadership is taking that very, very seriously. But if you look at the actual data, you look at the actual, you know, tariffs which have been imposed, they've been quite light, you know, compared to what's being threatened. And you look at, you know, the export data, China is still exporting, China is still selling to the rest of the world, because at the end of the day, this is a global economy that relies on cheap Chinese manufacturing, and that's not just going to be turned off overnight. So the trade war is always there looming, you know, the specter of it, and it could get worse. You know, in the coming weeks, Xi Jinping is supposed to be meeting with Donald Trump at the end of this month. We still don't know if that's going to happen. So there's lots of uncertainty there. But in terms of concrete impact of the trade war being felt on the ground by Chinese citizens, or indeed the world economy, it's not as dramatic as it might seem on the surface.
And meanwhile, leaders are gathering in Beijing this week for a pretty important series of meetings.
Yes, they absolutely are. They're meeting for what's known as a plenum, which is where the highest political body of the Communist Party, basically, they get together every year or so. This one is particularly important because what they decide at this one, we're pretty sure, will eventually form the basis of China's next 5-year plan. Now, that's the blueprint that China uses to basically say, this is what we want to achieve, these are our targets, these are our priorities, and this 5-year plan is going to be between 2026 and 2030. Now, I know that the idea of hundreds of bureaucrats in suits shaking hands, drawing up plans, that sort of thing, it doesn't seem that interesting on the surface, but these 5-year plans are actually very, very important. I actually took a look back at the 3 most important ones that we've seen in communist China's history, and I took a look at how they shaped the rest of the world economy and the rest of the world. This is it. Many say China's journey to becoming an economic powerhouse began in 1978, when leader Deng Xiaoping famously announced his country ought to embrace parts of the free market in order to save its struggling economy. This policy of reform and opening up, as it became known, was the cornerstone of China's next 5-year plan, and it transformed the lives of citizens, but it also fundamentally reshaped the global economy. By the early 2000s, millions of Western manufacturing jobs had been outsourced to new factories in China's coastal regions. China was now the workshop of the world. But even then, China's leadership was already thinking about the next step. It knew that an upwardly mobile country couldn't rely on cheap labor forever. It needed strategic emerging industries, a term first officially used in 2010 as part of the 12th 5-year plan. This meant green technology, so electric vehicles and solar panels, that sort of thing. Fast forward to today,
And China's not only the undisputed world leader in renewables and EVs, it also dominates the rare earth supply chains needed to build them. Very much a sore point in US-China relations today. Now, more recently, China's 5-year plans have focused on high-quality development, first formally introduced by Xi Jinping in 2017. This means challenging American dominance in technology and putting China at the cutting edge of things like chip making, computing, and artificial intelligence. There have been Chinese success stories like TikTok, Huawei, and even DeepSeek that show the policy is working, but Western countries increasingly see it as a threat to their national security. Until now, China's relied on advanced chips from the United States, the sales of which Washington's been trying to block. But that could change if the next 5-year plan includes President Xi's call for new productive forces. That means developing high-end tech, yes, but with the national security twist of making China self-sufficient, not so vulnerable to these US restrictions. So expect plenty of talk about that.
That was the BBC's Nick Marsh reporting there, and Nick has written a piece about China's next 5-year plan, which you can find on the BBC News website.
You're listening to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Catherine Biohanger and Rob Young. Isaac Fannin is here with your sport headlines.
Yeah, Manchester United snatched all 3 points away from Liverpool at Anfield for the first time in nearly a decade, thanks to a late-headed goal from defender Harry Maguire in the Premier League. 2-1 victory made it back-to-back Premier League wins for the first time under Ruben Amorim. It's 4 defeats in a row for Arne Slot's Liverpool. And the Israeli Premier League derby match between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Hapoel Tel Aviv was cancelled before kickoff on Sunday after what police described as public disorder and violent riots. The match was due to be played at Bloomfield Stadium, which is shared by the 2 teams. Dozens of smoke grenades and pyrotechnic devices were thrown, according to Israeli police, who posted on X saying, "This is not a football game, this is disorder and serious violence." 12 civilians and 3 officers were injured, while 9 people were arrested and 16 detained for questioning. Hapoel have criticised the derby cancellation, accusing Israeli police of preparing for war, not a sporting event. It does come after police in the United Kingdom were criticised for banning Maccabi fans from the November Europa League match against Aston Villa, including British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who called it the wrong decision. More sport a little bit later on.
We will talk to you then. Isaac, thank you.
Now, a posthumous memoir written by Virginia Giuffre, one of the most prominent accusers of Jeffrey Epstein, is making headlines here in the UK. Nobody's Girl, written before she took her own life in April, will be published on Tuesday. In it, Miss Giuffre said she had sex with Prince Andrew, the brother of King Charles, on 3 separate occasions, including when she was just 17 years old. The book paints a grim picture of a web of rich and powerful people abusing young women. Prince Andrew, who reached a financial settlement with Virginia Giuffre in 2022, has always denied any wrongdoing. On Friday, however, he announced that he was voluntarily giving up the use of his Duke of York title and membership of the Order of the Garter, the oldest and most senior order of chivalry in Britain. Buckingham Palace has not yet commented on the release of Miss Giuffre's memoir. The BBC has obtained a full copy of Nobody's Girl before its official release on Tuesday. Our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has read it and she joins us now on the line. Helena, it's a really interesting story how the BBC came to obtain a copy of the book. What more do we learn from the memoir?
Yes, the memoir, posthumous memoir, is officially released tomorrow, but the BBC managed to get a full copy of the book yesterday at a London bookshop. The bookshop accidentally putting it on sale before the official release, so we have had a copy of it. It's called Nobody's Girl by Virginia Roberts Giuffre. I've got a copy of it in my hand. It's got as well as the title, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting justice. And it, as you mentioned, mentions Prince Andrew in the book. Virginia Giuffre says that she had sex with him on 3 separate occasions. As you said, Prince Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing, but it's a powerful, more personal perspective in terms of what Virginia Giuffre says she went through at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein. and his circle. There are details of what she says is sadistic abuse that Epstein put her through. She says she feared she might die a sex slave. She also talks about the BBC Newsnight interview nearly 6 years ago with Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew gave that interview, and in the memoir, Virginia Giuffre says that Prince Andrew failed to communicate any sympathy to Epstein's victims. She also touches on that financial settlement with Miss Giuffre in 2022 and Prince Andrew. She talks about how she agreed to a one-year gag order, which she says seemed important to the prince because it ensured his mother's platinum jubilee would not be tarnished any more than it already has been. Prince Andrew gave up his titles and honours on Friday. There were further allegations in the Mail on Sunday this weekend, which alleged that Prince Andrew asked his personal police protection officer to find out personal information about Virginia Giuffre. The Metropolitan Police followed with a statement saying that it is actively looking into reports that Prince Andrew tried to obtain personal information. So Prince Andrew giving up his titles really hasn't taken the heat off Prince Andrew and also the royal family.
Helena, thank you. That's our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson there. And I'd also like to apologise for misspeaking at the beginning of the programme, wrongly referring to Prince Philip instead of Prince Andrew. This is Newsday on the BBC World Service.
Distribution of the BBC World Service in the United States is made possible by American Public Media, producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content, engaging audiences, creating meaningful and fostering conversation. The Global Talent Solutions Company combined.
Release the JP Morgan Trumpstein files already.
But now's a good time to check that to-do box. October is National Estate Planning Awareness Month.
Well, thanks. I guess that book comes out tomorrow. At least in the UK it comes out tomorrow. I wonder if it comes out in the USA tomorrow too.
Music and cultural connections for generations. Download a free guide at legacycpr.org.
Hello, welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with Rob Young and Catherine Delahunga.
Coming up, good news in the Democratic Republic of Congo as it's one step closer to being declared free of the deadly disease Ebola.
A BBC investigation uncovers the abuse faced by refugees who reached out for help in Turkey.
And in sport, victory for Manchester United, defeat for Liverpool. What does it mean for both clubs? Sport with Isaac to come after a summary of the latest world news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. President Trump has said the ceasefire in Gaza is still in place, hours after health officials in the territory confirmed Israeli airstrikes had killed more than 40 people. Israel had accused Hamas of killing 2 Israeli soldiers near Rafah in southern Gaza. Hamas denies the allegations. Meanwhile, the US says it believes Hamas is acting in good faith as it searches for the remains of the 16 Israeli hostages yet to be handed over. Jared Kushner, who helped Israel and Hamas reach a ceasefire agreement, said he believed the Palestinian group was looking to honor the agreement. The winner of Bolivia's presidential election, Rodrigo Paz, has said he will end the fuel shortage and address the country's wider economic problems. The election of the center-right pro-business senator ends 2 decades of almost continuous rule by the left-wing MAS party. Donald Trump says he'll impose tariffs on Colombia after he accused President Gustavo Petro of encouraging the massive nationwide production of drugs. The U.S. president has also said he will stop all financial aid to Colombia. China's top leaders are starting a 4-day high-level meeting in Beijing, which will determine the country's economic direction until 2030. The gathering, chaired by President Xi Jinping, is being held behind closed doors. Police in South Korea have issued arrest warrants for 45 suspects who were deported by Cambodia where they were accused of being involved in cyber scam operations. 64 South Koreans detained in Cambodia were returned at the weekend. A record 2.5 million earthen lamps have been lit in the Indian temple town of Ayodhya to mark the beginning of the Diwali festival. The festivities will continue until the end of Monday. BBC News.
Thank you for that news, Neil. Hello,
Happy
welcome to
Diwali.
Newsday with Rob Young and Catherine Garahanga. Coming up, we'll have stories on Gaza, where a fragile ceasefire is still holding. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Bolivia,
Thanks for saving
which has
Gaza.
just elected a new president. We welcome your messages as ever. Our text number is +4477
Thanks for saving USA.
20 50 85.
Well, let's return to the Middle East now, as the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas looks even more fragile after Gaza witnessed the most violent day since President Trump gathered world leaders in Egypt a week ago beneath a banner proclaiming peace in the Middle East. Dozens of Palestinians and 2 Israeli soldiers were killed as both sides, Israel and Hamas, blamed the other for violating the ceasefire. So what does this all mean? Let's get the thoughts of Gershon Baskin, co-director of the Alliance for Two States, and also a former Israeli hostage negotiator. Welcome back to Newsday.
Thank you. Good morning.
The ceasefire was effectively off yesterday, was it?
Well, it was breaking down, but it's back in place, and that's because of the pressure of the American team of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who made sure once they woke up and got on the phone and started talking both to the Israeli government, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and to the mediators of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey to get Hamas back in line. The ceasefire has been breaking down since the first day that it began, and that should be expected in trying to end a war which has been so devastating for 2 years. And it needs the constant involvement, engagement of President Trump and his envoys, because that's the only thing that led to the end of the war. That's the only thing that's going to move us forward to making sure that this ceasefire is the permanent end of this war.
Everybody
Yeah,
in the world putting pressure on them is what led to the end of it.
The ceasefire is going to have hills and valleys, there'll be fits and starts, but also pointing out that the
Vladimir Putin.
security infrastructure is not yet in place to ensure that Hamas is disarmed. There doesn't appear to have been much progress on assembling and deploying this international security force to get it into the Gaza Strip.
Well, there has been work done. It's a lot of work done behind the scenes. What first needs to happen is the deployment of the new Hamas non-technocratic government in Gaza. That's the first step that will enable the deployment of 10,000 Palestinian policemen who have been trained over the last months in Egypt and in Jordan. And of course, that will have to be enlarged in order to really control the Gaza Strip. This week, we're supposed to see in the Security Council in New York a resolution being put forth to embody the agreement, the end of the war agreement, in an international legitimacy through a Security Council resolution, which will include the mandate for the deployment of the multinational stabilization force that's within the agreement. So there are still legal steps that need to be taken, political steps that need to be taken. It's not clear to me, for instance, who's supposed to appoint the Palestinian government and what kind of linkage it would have to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. That's something that needs to be clarified, hopefully in this upcoming visit of Witkoff and Kushner.
Now, we know that deliveries of aid were suspended during the airstrikes on Sunday. We have just heard from an Israeli security official in the past half an hour saying that humanitarian aid continues to enter the Gaza Strip through
That's correct.
crossing at Kerem Shalom and elsewhere after Israeli inspection, this security official says. But point 8 of the original Trump plan said that entry of aid will proceed without interference from the two parties.
That's correct. What is supposed to happen is the reopening of the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza, with the deployment of a European monitoring mechanism to ensure that smuggling is not taking place. There was an agreement that existed like that back in 2005 when Israel first left Gaza. That needs to be more robust because we know over the years a lot of smuggling took place over that border. Israel says that they will control the flow of aid into Gaza, but this is not what the agreement says. And to the best of my knowledge, this is not the intentions of the Americans.
So are both sides then in violation of this agreement? Because we did have the Americans say before yesterday that they had intelligence that Hamas was preparing to breach the ceasefire agreement.
Well, I don't know what the intelligence information they have. The reality on the ground is that both sides breached their commitments in the agreement. This is nothing new between Israelis and Palestinians who have a history of making agreements and breaching them. The big difference today is the commitment of President Trump and his team to make sure that this holds, that this does not erupt into a new war. I think it's clear at this point, at least, that the Americans are totally committed to making sure that the ceasefire works and that the further steps take place. You know, we've gotten more attention from the President of the United States and his team than any other part of the world in the last years, and I think it's quite significant. President Trump said this is his most important achievement, probably his most important life achievement, and I don't think he wants to let go of it.
And what do you make of the reports that we've seen about gangs allegedly being armed by Israel fighting Hamas in the south?
It's real.
Sorry?
It's not alleged, it's real. This is very typical of occupation armies that find criminal elements within a society to fight against the bad guys. So Israel has organized, has funded, and have provided weapons to all kinds of gangs. They're called family-led gangs. They're mostly young people who have been engaged in criminal activities over years, and they've been supplied by weapons. Hamas recently, in the last days, caught a shipment of weapons that was going to these gangs, and they've been busy killing each other. I think it's personally disgraceful that after what all the Palestinians in Gaza have been through for 2 years, that we have a situation of Palestinians killing Palestinians. But that's also part of the reality. That needs to stop. There needs to be the law and order reinstated in Gaza, because the most important thing now is to get housing for 2 million people who don't have houses anymore. They need a roof above their heads because winter is coming. It's getting cold already, and the rains will start. So that's the most important thing that needs to be done for the people of Gaza. And these gangs and Hamas who are killing each other are doing a great disservice to the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people need to raise their voices against it.
What then do you see happening to try to ensure that the situation in Gaza does improve? It does seem as if the territory is in a state of limbo at the moment. There's been no progress to move to the second stage of the ceasefire, partly because the first stage hasn't been completed. The remains of many of the dead hostages from Israel are yet to be returned by Hamas.
Right,
Hamas seems to be saying that they can't find the remains because they can't get heavy equipment in through some of the crossings. It's hard to see the way forward at the moment.
Well, that's one of the problems, that they can't get the heavy machinery in, but I think that the Americans will enforce that right now. Turkish and Egyptian personnel will be coming into Gaza to assist in that. Hamas only controls 50% of the territory in Gaza also, and something's got to be done, at least while the Israelis control the other 50%, to search for bodies by the Israelis if they want to recover them. And we may have to accept the reality that some bodies may never be recovered because they're buried underneath the rubble of buildings that were bombed by Israel.
That would be very hard for those families to have to accept.
Very, very hard it will be, yes.
Thanks very much indeed. That's Gershon
You're
Baskin there, who's a co-director of the Alliance for Two States.
Now, some good news from the Democratic Republic of Congo. On Sunday, the last patient was discharged from an Ebola treatment facility in rural Bulape. If normal cases are reported for 42 days, the most recent outbreak will be declared over. The first case was detected on the 4th of September, and since then, 53 confirmed cases as well as 11 suspected cases have been reported. Dr. Patrick Otim from the World Health Organization joins us now from Kananga in the DRC. He's traveling to Bulape. He's the Program Area Manager for Emergency Response at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. Thank you for joining us on Newsday. This is good news. What do you think has made the difference in terms of this Ebola outbreak in this part of the DRC compared to previous ones?
Thank you for having me. Good morning. Yes, this outbreak, which was declared 6 weeks ago, has been contained quite fast, and there have been a number of factors that we can consider. I think the top of the list has been a very strong leadership from the Ministry of Health, which has been facilitative of the response interventions, both at the national and the provincial level. And then we've had a very good level of collaboration from the community, who have really facilitated interventions. They have welcomed vaccination. They proactively requested for teams to come to their area and carry out investigation. The third issue has been that we also had resources being mobilized by different partners. There's been very good level of collaboration from the international community and even donors that have helped us to be able to move quickly. You remember we had challenges with accessing the area, and the UN mission MONUSCO was able to give us a helicopter to establish an air bridge. So this mobilization across all agencies and government institutions helped us to be able to access and overcome challenges. We have been able to implement a comprehensive range of public health interventions, from contact tracing to safe and dignified burial, community engagement and risk communication, and vaccination. So far, we have vaccinated over 35,000 people within Bulape and the neighboring health zones, and we've been able to follow over 3,000 contacts since this started. And then lastly is the availability of countermeasures. As you know, we have approved vaccine for this strain of the Ebola virus, the Ebola Zaire. So we're able to deploy the vaccine quickly. We also have therapeutics that we were using for managing the cases. And we were able to decentralize testing using the Gene Expert platform so that we could have results available within short time of 6 hours, as opposed to taking samples to Kinshasa. So all this package of interventions really helped us to get to the point where we are now.
Dr. Otim, please correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that the death toll in this particular outbreak was 45 people, perhaps higher than you might expect, considering all those advances in terms of Ebola vaccines and treatments. The last Ebola outbreak in the DRC back in 2022 only saw one confirmed case. So what happened this time around?
Yeah, thank you. So in the entire period we have been responding, we have recorded 53 confirmed cases. Out of the 53, 34 died. We also recorded 11 probable cases. Those are cases that died before samples were collected, but confirmed cases were linked to them. So that brings the number to 45, as you've said. Now, there have been 3 issues largely responsible for the high fatality that we have seen. The first one is that the outbreak was detected a little bit late. As you can see, that there were 11 people that had already died before even samples could be taken. So the late detection meant that a number of the people were already sick by the time we got them, and they got to the facility late. And when a patient presents very late with Ebola, it's usually very difficult to save them. The second issue was then that by the time of detection, we had very limited capacity in Bulape to manage these kinds of infection and the level of severity that some of the patients had. So we struggled against time to be able to set up a comprehensive treatment facility to bring in the required expertise so that we can be able to effectively manage. And then lastly was also that there were some really fear among the population, some of the population in presenting to the treatment facility. So some did come in very late, and it was very, very difficult to be able to reverse the course of the disease. So unfortunately, despite all the efforts, we've had a 64% case fatality in this response compared to the others that we had before.
Yes, a higher
Hope Trump
fatality
canceling
rate that
funds
we've seen
didn't hurt the
compared to what we've
response.
seen in recent outbreaks in the DRC and
Probably
elsewhere.
did. Like it's
Dr.
hurting everything
Otim,
everywhere.
Patrick Otim from the WHO, thank you for joining us here on Newsday.
Has one of the world's largest refugee populations. Wars and instability beyond its eastern borders, particularly in Syria, have pushed millions into the country seeking sanctuary, with many in need of help from their Turkish hosts. One man, Saadettin Karagos, became known as the grandfather of refugees for his work helping many of them in the Turkish capital Ankara. But a BBC investigation has revealed that he took advantage of some of those who came to him for help. Mr. Saadettin has told the BBC he rejects all of the accusations against him. Well, we can speak now to the BBC's Fundara Öztürk, who is behind this investigation and joins us now from Ankara. So just tell us then about this man.
Hey, he's a retired bank worker in his 60s, and he started his charity work over a decade ago in the capital city, Ankara. And he established this charity in a neighborhood with a high concentration of refugees. So, and for what, and so he soon became a kind of local hero. And in the area, actually, he known as the grandfather of the refugees.
Why did
But
you like
this
that?
charity store distributes food, clothing, donations collected from donors to refugees in need who visit this store. And he claims that so far his charity works
Don't you think
provide
it was
support
making fun
from
of Trump?
37,000 individuals, most of them refugees. And he also won an award from a local newspaper in 2020.
What does
And
that mean?
his work has been featured on national TV. And he says he has attracted support from national and international organizations.
And so, what are the allegations against him then?
The woman I spoke saying Mr. Kyrgios took advantage
Nobody's
of
mad or
them when they
crying.
were desperate need for help.
It sounds like
The
you're projecting.
allegations
Maybe you're
are
mad and
sexual
crying.
assault,
Everybody hates
harassment, and
Trump.
threat. For example, a 27-year-old Syrian woman, Nada, says the first time she visited his organization, he said he would only give her aid if she went to an empty flat with him. She says she stormed out, but she had to go there again because her family were in desperate need and needed help urgently. And she says she didn't know where else to return. Uh, she explains, like, on one occasion, she explains he came from behind and grabbed my hand. He forced me to his genitals. He was like a monster attacking me, she says. And it was really traumatic for her. But um, uh, but she afraid of the stigma attached to sexual abuse and scared she would be blamed. She says she didn't feel she could tell anyone what had happened.
And so, what has his response been to these allegations?
He denies all the allegations. He says that the aid distribution area in the store is small, crowded, and monitored by CCTVs, so he could not have been alone with any woman. And he also says that he had diabetes, he had high blood pressure, and he also showed us a medical report with details of an operation in 2016 to remove his left testicle. He claims this meant he was not able to perform any sexual activity. And yeah, and also he says that he reported refugees abuse against him. But all the women we spoke, they denied that they or their relatives involved with crime, and actually us, we have seen no evidence to suggest that they were.
What about the authorities? Have they responded to anything that you've uncovered?
Yeah, so far, two women accused him of sexual harassment and assault and filed complaints against Kyrgios officially. One in 2019, the other one is 2015. But prosecutors decided not to pursue them due to insufficient evidence. So also we know that in 2022, the UN's Refugee Agency conducted several confidential interviews with some of the women, and in 2025, police raided his shop, suspended his organization, and questioned him over new allegations of sexual abuse. But both the UN and the police say they take the allegations very seriously, but are unable to pursue further action because neither victims nor witnesses are willing to come forward to make formal complaints.
All right, thanks very much indeed. That's the BBC's Fundera Ozturk.
You're listening to News.